Millionaire fires more than 7 maids until one donates her own blood to save his daughter. And he. New York, winter. Snow clung gently to the tall buildings, and golden light spilled from the wide windows high above the streets. Inside a penthouse perched atop a Manhattan skyscraper, Nathan Walker stood silently by the glass, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He was a man of success, the founder and CEO of a billion-dollar construction technology company. To the outside world, Nathan was the embodiment of power and control. Sharp suits, sharper words, and a mind that didn't tolerate failure. But inside this apartment, behind closed doors, a very different story unfolded, one driven by a fear too deep to speak aloud. Sophie, Nathan's 6-year-old daughter, lay in an isolation room at the end of the east hallway. The room was more like a mini hospital chamber, hospital-grade air filtration, sterile lighting, and a stillness that felt clinical. Sophie suffered from a rare congenital immune disorder. Even the smallest germ could be deadly. Nathan had lost his wife 4 years ago. A car accident had taken the only woman he ever loved, leaving him alone to raise their daughter. Since then, his world had shrunk, to his work and to Sophie. He became obsessed with control. Anything that could pose even the slightest risk to his daughter was eliminated, including noise, dust, and even a single sneeze. In the past 6 months, 12 housekeepers had been fired, some for dropping a towel, some for accidentally turning on soft music, and one simply for standing too close to the forbidden hallway. The one rule in this home was absolute silence, especially near Sophie's room. The old housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, was the only one who had lasted. She understood that behind Nathan's cold exterior was a father drowning in desperation. But no one else could survive the pressure. And now she would need to find someone new. In the quiet shadows of the apartment, the steady hum of air purifiers filled the space like a constant reminder. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress, a place not built for living, but to protect the fragile life of one little girl. And Nathan, a man who could build cities, was powerless to save his own daughter. Somewhere else in New York City, long before the sun had a chance to rise, Grace Thompson was already awake in her small Brooklyn apartment. The alarm rang at 4:30 a.m., as it did every morning. She sat up, pulled on an old sweater, poured herself a cup of cheap black coffee, and looked out the window that faced a brick wall. Grace used to be someone entirely different. She once worked at the public library, reading stories to children every weekend, her voice filling the room with warmth and joy. She once had a family, a little boy named Liam with wide eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. But all of that disappeared one rainy afternoon 3 years ago when a tragic accident took Liam's life. Since then, Grace hadn't been the Grace people remembered. She withdrew from the world, living quietly inside a pain that had no name. The walls of her apartment were the only place she allowed herself to break. She lost her job because she could no longer be around children. Money ran out, and now she took whatever work she could find, even cleaning strangers' homes. She told no one about her past. To others, she was simply the quiet woman who's always on time and works hard. But inside, Grace carried a vast emptiness, a silence not chosen, but born of loss. That morning, her phone rang. A cleaning service called to say there was an open position, full-time at a home in Manhattan with surprisingly high pay. But one condition: the applicant must strictly obey a no-noise policy. Grace didn't ask why. She only nodded and said, "Send me the address, I'll be there." Shy, when Grace arrived, the towering glass buildings of Manhattan made her feel like she had stepped into another world, pristine, cold, and distant. The doorman eyed her up and down before making a call to confirm her visit. Then Mrs. Henderson, the elderly housekeeper, appeared at the staff entrance. "Grace Thompson?" "Yes, ma'am." "Mrs. Henderson, come with me." Inside, everything was white, polished, and so silent It felt unnatural. Mrs. Henderson led her to the kitchen and pointed to the chair across from her. "Before I ask anything else, I need you to understand something. This is not an ordinary job. The homeowner is extremely strict, and the most important rule is no noise whatsoever near the east hallway. No singing, no coughing, no talking, nothing. Do you understand?" Grace paused for a moment, then replied softly, "I've been living in silence for the past 3 years, Mrs. Henderson. I think I'll do just fine." Mrs. Henderson looked into her eyes, and in that instant she didn't just see a potential hire, but a soul that had been broken and was still standing. On her first day of work, Grace moved through the apartment like a shadow. Every step was careful, deliberate, nothing excessive. In her hands was a checklist of approved cleaning products, each labeled with precision. She was strictly forbidden to touch anything not pre-approved. Mrs. Henderson repeated it more than once. And above all, never go near the east hallway. That's where young Sophie's room is. Grace nodded. She didn't need to be warned. She understood better than anyone the fragility of a child's life. The apartment was vast but lifeless, clean to the point of sterility. Each room felt like an exhibit in a museum, flawless but soulless. Grace worked in silence all morning. The only sound was the soft scrape of cloth on polished hardwood. Around midday, while cleaning near the forbidden hallway, Grace froze. A faint sound drifted through the air. It was singing, wordless, a simple melody floating in and out like tiny waves, so fragile, so soft, yet deeply moving. Grace's heart pounded. She shouldn't have stopped, shouldn't have listened. But this wasn't music, it was the sound of a child trying to lull herself to sleep. Grace closed her eyes, and in that moment she saw Liam, her little boy, the way he used to hum himself to sleep, asking for one more story, until his eyes gave in. Her heart tightened. A lonely child, singing to the silence. From that day on, every time she worked near that hallway, Grace carried a small piece of colored paper, blue, yellow, purple, tucked inside her apron pocket. When no one was watching, she would quietly fold a crane, a fish, a tiny heart, and accidentally drop it near Sophie's door. No words were exchanged. No one saw it happen. But the next day, the origami would be gone. And Grace knew the little girl had taken it. It became a silent ritual. Each day, a new shape, a new color. Small paper gifts carrying warmth, from one grieving heart to another lonely one. A week passed. Grace still hadn't seen Sophie's face, but she could feel her presence. She imagined the tiny hands picking up the paper animals and smiling. Until one Friday afternoon, while Grace was cleaning the living room window, she suddenly felt eyes on her. She turned. Sophie. The little girl stood just a few steps away, dressed in star-patterned pajamas, barefoot, a thin medical mask covering most of her face. Her wide, dark brown eyes, curious, innocent, stared straight at Grace. This wasn't supposed to happen. Grace froze. Nathan's warnings echoed in her mind. If you look at her, talk to her, or even step near, you're fired immediately. But then Sophie spoke, softer than the rustle of wind. Was it you who left the paper bird? Grace swallowed. The girl's eyes held her in place. She couldn't turn away. Slowly she nodded and whispered, "It was me." And Sophie smiled, a brief, quiet smile that lit up her entire face. In that moment, every wall, every rule, every unspoken fear began to melt away. One Tuesday afternoon, something about the apartment felt off. Grace noticed it the second she stepped inside. The security guard avoided eye contact, and Mrs. Henderson sighed more than usual. Then, like thunder, Nathan's voice rang out from the hallway. "All staff, living room, now." Grace entered with the others. No one dared speak. In Nathan's hand was a clear plastic box filled with dozens of tiny origami figures, paper birds, butterflies, hearts, fish. This, he held the box high, his eyes scanning the room. Who made this? Silence. They were found in my daughter's room this morning, he continued, his voice growing colder. Who brought unsterilized objects into her isolation space? No response. Grace's feet felt glued to the floor. Nathan's eyes scanned each face, then landed on hers. You, he said, pointing. Grace Thompson, was it you? Grace took a deep breath. Yes, it was me. A few gasps echoed in the room, but Nathan didn't need confirmation. He stepped closer, his eyes burning. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you realize a single germ on that cheap paper could kill my daughter? They were clean, Grace said quietly. I washed my hands, and I... You had no right, Nathan shouted, his voice cracking, not just in anger, but in fear. You invaded her living space. You ignored every warning, every rule. I've done everything to keep her alive, and you think this is some kind of cute gesture? Grace trembled, but she didn't retreat. It wasn't cute, she said, her voice tight. I just wanted to make her smile. Once. Nathan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Smile? You think I want her to smile if it means letting a virus walk through the door? Grace looked up. Her eyes were wet but steady. I had a child, she said, a boy named Liam. He used to love paper birds. He laughed at small things, too. Nathan didn't move. He died in an accident, she whispered. And I never got to hear his last laugh. Since then, I've lived in silence. I didn't do it for me. I did it for your daughter, because I saw the loneliness you're trying to lock away with rules. A long pause stretched between them. No one else in the room dared breathe. Mrs. Henderson placed a hand gently over her heart. Nathan stood still, gripping the box. Finally, he took a step toward Grace, the fire in his eyes replaced by exhaustion. Go to your room, he said quietly. I'm not firing you. Grace blinked. But from now on, nothing goes near the east hallway. No origami, no notes, no contact. Understood? Grace nodded. As she turned away, Nathan loosened his grip on the box, revealing a light blue paper bird at the very top. That bird, for one fleeting moment, looked like it was spreading its wings to protect something Nathan no longer dared to face. Since that confrontation, no one brought up the origami again. No explanations, no apologies, no forgiveness. But something in the apartment shifted. Not quite tense anymore, yet not at peace either. Still, something fragile had been planted, not trust, but the beginning of understanding. And when the next crisis hit, it would be that fragile thread that held them together. Between Nathan and Grace stretched a silent distance, held together by unspoken boundaries and unresolved emotions. Then one night, that fragile balance was shattered by a piercing medical alarm blaring from the internal apartment system. Grace jolted awake from her shallow sleep in the staff room. She rushed into the hallway and saw flashing red lights at the far end. Sophie's isolation wing. Nathan sprinted past her without a word. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. The medical team was already there, bursting through the sealed doors as digital monitors blinked frantically. Sophie lay motionless on the bed, her skin gray, lips blue. "What's happening?" Nathan shouted. "Severe anaphylactic shock," the doctor barked. "Blood pressure dropping fast. We need to move her now." Mount Sinai Hospital, 2 o'clock in the morning. The ICU was a maze of white lights, antiseptic air, and steady machine beeps. Grace sat hunched in the corner of the waiting room. No one had asked her to come, but she couldn't stay away. Inside, Nathan stood like a statue, staring into the emergency room where Sophie was surrounded by wires, oxygen masks, and heart monitors. Footsteps. Dr. Ricardo emerged, his face deeply lined with worry. "We've stabilized the anaphylaxis," he said, "but the reaction caused temporary organ stress. Sophie now needs a full blood transfusion, and it must be an extremely rare type, AB negative, with high antibody compatibility." Nathan exhaled, a half-release of terror. "Blood. I'll get it. Whatever it takes. I'll call every blood bank in New York, Boston, D.C. Ricardo interrupted, more solemn now. "We've already tried, nationwide, but nothing's a full match. Sophie has a rare immune mutation. We need someone almost genetically identical. We have 36 hours, at most." Nathan froze. I can try." "You don't qualify." Ricardo shook his head. "We need to test as many people as possible." Grace's eyes lit up. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Test me." Both men turned. "You?" Nathan whispered. "Grace, you don't have to." "I want to," she said, cutting him off. "If there's even a small chance, I can't just sit here." 10 o'clock in the morning, more than 70 staff members, nurses, even doctors, all tested, all incompatible. Finally, a nurse called Grace. She sat down, hand clenched, heart pounding. One technician muttered, "1,000,000 to 1 odds. Waste of time." Grace didn't reply. She wasn't here for odds. She was here for hope. 12 noon, Dr. Ricardo rushed toward Nathan, disbelief written all over his face. "The results are in," he said. "It's incredible. A perfect match. 100%. Nathan stepped back. "What?" "She's not just compatible," Ricardo explained, eyes wide. "Her immune profile is almost identical to Sophie's. Medically, it's like they're family." All sound inside Nathan collapsed. He turned to Grace, the woman he once nearly fired, now his daughter's only hope for survival. But Ricardo wasn't finished. "There's a problem," he said, somber. "Grace has chronic anemia. Her health is fragile. To give the full amount Sophie needs, it could kill her?" Nathan went cold. "No," he said. "I can't ask someone else to pay that price." Grace stepped forward, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Mr. Walker," she said, her gaze unwavering, "you don't need to ask. I know this pain. I live with it every day. And if I can save one more child from it, even at a cost, I'll do it." Nathan said nothing, and in that moment, all boundaries, status, wealth, past, vanished. There stood a desperate father and a mother who had lost everything, ready to give one final chance at life to a child she didn't bear, but already loved with her whole heart. Grace had made her decision, no hesitation, no second thoughts, no conditions. When Dr. Ricardo asked one final time, "Are you absolutely sure?" she only nodded. From that moment on, no one could change her mind. When every other attempt had failed and time was running out, Grace didn't wait for Nathan to beg. She stepped willingly across the line between life and death. Not for herself, but for a child who had never once called her mom. A special transfusion room was set up in haste. 2 beds were placed side by side under pale white lights and the steady hum of machines. Nathan stood between them, between his unconscious daughter and the woman who was ready to give up everything to save her. Grace lay still, her arm connected to the transfusion tube, head tilted slightly toward Sophie. A nurse gently placed an oxygen mask over her face while doctors monitored her heart rate and blood pressure. Across from her, Sophie remained motionless. Her skin was ghostly pale. Vital signs blinked across monitors. 1 more hour, and her organs would begin to fail. "Begin," Ricardo ordered. Blood began to flow from Grace's body, deep red, warm, like the transfer of life itself. Nathan held her cold hand. He had never known what true helplessness felt like, until now. All his wealth, power, and knowledge meant nothing here. Only one woman, not a doctor, not a scientist, but a mother who had lost everything, was doing what no one else dared. Grace opened her eyes and gave a faint smile. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "I couldn't be anywhere else," Nathan replied, his voice breaking. 1 minute, 2, 5. Grace's body weakened visibly. Her heartbeat slowed. Her lips lost color. "Sophie, will she be okay?" she asked, eyes fluttering closed. "She'll live," Ricardo answered. "Your blood is a perfect match. Her body is responding." Grace nodded softly. Then, "If I don't make it," she inhaled slowly. "At least my life meant something." A tear slipped down Nathan's cheek. He gripped her hand tighter and leaned in close. "You're not going anywhere. Not today." Nathan whispered the words like a promise, not just to Grace but to himself. He tightened his grip on her hand, feeling the chill of her skin, but also the faint pulse still holding on. For the first time in years, fear was no longer theoretical. It wasn't a risk he could manage with plans or contracts. It was real, alive, staring him in the face as the only person brave enough to risk her life for his daughter lay silently before him. In that moment, Nathan realized, some things can't be controlled by logic or protected by money and rules. Some people, when they appear, don't just save a child. They awaken a heart that had long forgotten how to feel. The hospital room was bathed in soft white light, strangely still. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor ticked on, like time whispering that life had not yet left. Nathan Walker sat slouched in a chair beside the bed, fingers interlocked, eyes fixed on Grace's face. 3 days. It had only been 3 days. But it felt like a lifetime. He never thought he'd be afraid of anything. He had faced billion-dollar deals, high-stake risks, and the chaos of a competitive world. But never had he shaken like this, because for the first time, he knew. He could lose someone irreplaceable. Grace lay motionless, her skin pale, breath faint. Every beep on the monitor made him freeze for a second. He had prayed, something he hadn't done since his wife died. "You don't get to leave me. Not you." He had never said it aloud, but he knew. Since the moment Grace entered their lives, everything changed. She wasn't the help. She wasn't just the match for Sophie's blood. She was the only one who saw his pain and didn't run. And now she lay there, nearly lifeless, because of a choice no one asked her to make. He leaned forward, placing his hand over hers. Cold, but there was still a pulse. "Grace," he whispered, his voice caught in his throat. "I need you to wake up. I haven't even told you." Then, movement, subtle, gentle. Her fingers twitched, her eyelashes fluttered like soft wings. Nathan jumped up, heart pounding. "Grace, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, blurry at first, then focused on him. Time stopped. She was alive. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. He gripped her hand tighter and sat down, voice cracking. "You really did it. You came back." She gave him a weak, tired smile. "Sophie, is she okay?" He nodded, tears welling in eyes that were always too sharp to soften. "She's better. She's alive. Because of you. Grace, you saved her. You saved us both." She closed her eyes for a moment. He held her hand like it was the most fragile thing in the world. Then, as if he couldn't hold back anymore, he spoke. "I was scared, terrified I'd never see you again, and it made me realize—" She looked at him. Quiet. He took a deep breath. No armor in his gaze, no pride, just a man who knew he was in love. "I can't lose you, Grace, not just because of Sophie, because of me." He touched her cheek, gently, and in that single touch, Grace felt the words she longed to hear, spoken not from his lips, but from his heart. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her hand, still weak, curled slowly around his. Just then, the door swung open. Sophie, all bright curls and pink cheeks, ran in like a burst of spring. She froze when she saw Grace's eyes open, and then beamed. "Mommy Grace." The words echoed, the very first time they had ever been spoken, like a song. Grace stared, stunned. Before she could react, Sophie climbed onto the bed and hugged her tightly, burying her face in Grace's chest. Nathan watched the two, and his heart broke open. Sophie had chosen Grace, instinctively, purely, completely. He sat beside them, brushed Sophie's hair aside, and looked into Grace's eyes. No hesitation now, only certainty. "My family," he whispered, like someone who had found his way home. Grace looked at him. "Are you sure?" "For the first time in my life," Nathan smiled. "I don't need control. I just need love." She gazed at him, eyes full, then turned to Sophie, wrapping her arms around the little girl. The hospital room was no longer a place of recovery. It was a beginning, a new life, a new family. None of them said another word. They didn't need to, because the most important things were already understood by the heart. From that moment on, their lives took on a new color. Gone were the long, silent days. Gone were the rigid rules and constant fears. In their place came laughter, sunlight, and hope, the very things Grace had brought back into Nathan and Sophie's world. It was a late spring afternoon. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees of Central Park, dancing over the grass and benches. Children laughed in the distance, birds chirped overhead, and the breeze whispered through the leaves like the soundtrack to joy. Nathan sat on a wooden bench, watching Sophie as she ran barefoot across the field, chasing a tiny paper kite Grace had made. Every time she shouted, "Mommy Grace, look at me," his heart softened. Grace sat beside him, her hair loose, her face peaceful. No more hospital walls, no more machines. Just life, real, simple, beautiful life. Nathan glanced sideways at her. She didn't know what he was about to do. His heartbeat quickened. He inhaled deeply, then said, "Grace." She turned to him, smiling softly. "What is it?" He stood, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace froze. "Nathan." He knelt, not with theatrics, not for a show, but because everything he'd been holding in needed to be spoken. Right now. "Grace Thompson, you saved my daughter, but you did more than that. You saved my heart, the part I thought was gone forever." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, modest but elegant, catching the soft light like a quiet promise. "I don't want to spend another moment not calling you my family, not out of duty, but because I love you. I love your gentleness, your strength, and even the pain you carry. Because you carry it with so much courage." Grace covered her mouth. Tears welled up, quiet and clear, not dramatic, but beautiful in their honesty. "Will you marry me?" he asked, barely a whisper. She couldn't speak. She simply nodded, strongly. Nathan rose, wrapping her in his arms. From a distance, Sophie shouted, "You're getting married, right? You have to." They both laughed through their tears, and in that moment, no one was a stranger anymore. 1 year later, a warm summer morning, just enough sun, just enough breeze. The wedding was held in the backyard of their new home, filled with jasmine blossoms, birdsong, and peace. No extravagance, no crowd, just those who truly mattered. A few close friends, an acoustic guitar, strings of colorful origami hanging from tree branches, made by Sophie herself. And in the center, little Sophie, now healthy and glowing, wore a tiny white dress and a crown of paper flowers, carrying the wedding rings in her hands as she walked between her parents. "Daddy? Mommy? It's time," she said seriously, making everyone laugh. Grace looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Grace. No words needed. As they exchanged rings, their eyes locked, not just as two adults in love, but as three souls who had once been broken, now becoming whole together. When they kissed, Sophie jumped and shouted, "Mommy belongs to Daddy, Daddy belongs to Mommy, and I belong to both." Laughter filled the garden. Their family, at last, was reborn. Not perfect, but real, gentle, and more complete than any dream could ever be. The wedding didn't end with fireworks or loud music. It ended with tight hugs, tearful smiles, and a silent promise. We'll start over together. 3 months after the wedding, they moved into a small house on the edge of the suburbs, with lavender and white daisies blooming in the front yard. Behind the house, a modest garden where Sophie could run barefoot among the butterflies and morning light. The house wasn't big, but it had enough sunlight, enough wind, and more than enough peace. Most importantly, it had love, something Nathan had never truly felt in all the luxury homes he'd owned. Grace carefully arranged photo frames, flower vases, and wooden trinkets, as if she was rebuilding her life, piece by piece. This time, she wasn't alone. Nathan built a swing between 2 oak trees where Grace and Sophie spent afternoons reading. He wasn't just the man of business deals anymore. He learned to fold origami, to cook vegetable soup, and to listen without offering solutions. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Grace sat in their small kitchen, watching the soft yellow light spill across the window pane. Nathan brought out 2 mugs of hot cocoa and sat beside her. She turned to him, her eyes glowing. "Do you ever regret it?" He smiled and shook his head. Not once, not even for a second. Months later, Grace opened a small community center downtown, a place for single mothers and children who had lost their parents. She called it the Second Light. Nathan funded it, but never interfered. He knew this was her dream, a way for her to heal by helping others do the same. Grace led weekly support sessions. She didn't share much about her past, but her voice, her eyes, her presence told people she understood their pain. She didn't promise easy lives, but she offered something she once never had, a place to begin again. Sophie attended a school nearby. She was healthy, bright, playful, and full of love for her mother. Every morning before leaving for school, she would run to Grace and whisper, "I love you, Mommy." Grace would hug her tight, her eyes shimmering. "I love you too, so much." Sometimes Nathan stood nearby, quietly watching, heart melting just like the first time Sophie had said, "Mommy Grace." That house, once cold and sterile, now echoed with laughter. Grace's soft singing in the kitchen, Sophie's endless school stories, Nathan's awkward jokes that somehow made both girls burst out laughing. Every evening they ate together. No rushing, no phones, just candlelight, warm food, and warmer eyes. Grace, once a woman with a shattered heart, now lived each day completely. She was no longer a grieving mother. She was the mother of a deeply loved child, the wife of a man who once didn't know love, until she taught him. One golden evening, Sophie sat folding paper cranes on the front steps. Nathan and Grace sat behind her, fingers interlaced, smiles kissed by the setting sun. Sophie turned and held up a purple origami bird. "I named this one Hope. Mommy says hope always stays." Grace laughed, hugging her. "You're smart like your dad." Nathan shook his head. "No, she's smart like her mom, the woman who taught this whole house how to love again." Oh, the 3 of them embraced in that simple, perfect moment. There were no grand miracles, just a house, a swing, a family, not born by blood, but made whole by choice and love. And on the porch, another paper bird rested silently in the sun, not a gift of grief, but one of grace.